My name is Alex Padilla. I have the honor and privilege of serving as California's Secretary of State. Proud son of immigrants, born and raised right here in the San Fernando Valley, Los Angeles, California. I graduated high school in 1990. Graduate of San Fernando High School, home of Richie Valens. If you saw the movie La Bamba, then you know exactly where I grew up. But from 1990 through 1994, I was away at college. I was studying mechanical engineering at MIT. Spent 4 winters in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology before graduating in June of 1994 and coming home. And I was born in the San Fernando Valley, actually a middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother. So 3 children to immigrant parents. My parents are from Mexico. My father from Jalisco, from Puerto Vallarta specifically. My mother was from Chihuahua. They came separately in the 60s and met here in Los Angeles. They came with that, we're going to give ourselves 1 year to try to find a job and find a life in Los Estados Unidos. And I tell the story that they found each other, they found their jobs, and they fell in love and wanted to get married. So they fell in love, applied for green cards in that order. I thank the U.S. government every day for saying yes. Otherwise, my life story would probably be a lot different. But my parents, arreglaron. They got their green cards, got married, and settled into the San Fernando Valley. That's where they raised 3 children. My father, before retiring, worked as a short order cook for 40 years. A lot of scrambled eggs, a lot of pancakes, a lot of sandwiches and hamburgers. For the same 40 years, my mom used to clean houses. So needless to say, it was hard work, honest work, but hard work, modest wages. On those incomes, though, they raised 3 children and bought a home in Pacoima, California, which is where I grew up. So like a lot of people, son of hardworking parents, product of public schools here in Los Angeles. For me growing up, there was a couple of constants. Number one was my parents, especially my dad, saying, do well in school. Getting a good education was the ticket to a better future. I can't tell you how many times my dad would interrupt me when I was doing my homework, and he would tell me, this is, I think, his way of expressing his fatigue. He would say, hijo, cuando crezcas, quiero que trabajes con tu mente y no con tu espalda. He would say, I want you to work with your mind, not with your back. I think there's a lot of dignity and honor in manual labor, but that was his way of saying he wanted better for us. And, so education was important in our household, and that's why my brother, my sister, and I, we all ended up going to college and graduating from college. For me, there was an opportunity to study at MIT. Growing up, I used to play a lot of baseball, Little League baseball, high school baseball. And while my dream could have been playing for the Los Angeles Dodgers, I knew I needed a backup plan. And I used to love math. Somehow I did well in science, so all my teachers and counselors said, well, you ought to be an engineer. In addition to a lot of the great universities here in California, there's this really, really good one in Massachusetts called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. You should apply. I did, learned a little bit about the school, sent an application. Even by the time the acceptance letter came, I knew, number one, I had never been east of El Paso, so it was a completely foreign world to me. But number two, it was both a chance of a lifetime for me to study at a university like MIT, but it would have been the fulfillment of my parents' dreams. So as much as I might have been nervous or scared, New England was far outside the comfort zone for a young Latino growing up in Pacoima. I knew that I had to go and try my best in honor of my parents and their dreams and their sacrifice. Growing up in Pacoima, the time that I did, the 70s and 80s, one could say it was very diverse because there was a lot of Latinos in the community. A lot of people would say it's not very diverse because there was the vast majority Latinos in that area. So whether it was Little League baseball or even as I got into high school, if we were playing in communities that were very close by, baseball was just baseball. But both in Little League and in high school, there would be times that we would travel a little bit further away to compete, either during the regular season or for tournaments, into areas that weren't as diverse. And when I've seen movies over the years as a kid, as a young man, and even in more recent years, the more recent one was the movie McFarland, where it's Kevin Costner is a track coach leading a bunch of Latino kids in the Central Valley to compete against teams that were non-Latinos. And you see the inequities, the discrepancy between the uniforms or the equipment they could train with, and that sort of thing. That's what I experienced in baseball, whether it was traveling to West LA or to Valencia back then, or places like Thousand Oaks, to see other teams look down on us because we were Latino, and to hear the chatter in the stands, what the other team's parents were saying about our parents. We weren't immune or naive to know that there wasn't that level of judgment or discrimination that existed in society. We just thought that's the world that we're growing up in, and let's use that as a motivation to try to prove them wrong, try to win the game, but also try to overcome. So, coming home from college in 1994, not just after 4 years of studying at MIT, but 4 very cold winters, came home with my mechanical engineering degree in hand, but also coming home to a tough economic environment. Southern California was struggling economically, and the places where I worked as an engineer, hoping to come back to, was laying off more people than they were hiring. So, trying to be a new person there was going to be difficult. And I started thinking, well, what else is out there for me? If it's not engineering, what else could I work in? Because, I've graduated college, it's time to go to work. But I came home not just to a difficult economic environment, I came home to a very difficult political environment because Proposition 187 was on the ballot that November. And so I came home in June, July, before I know it, working in internships here and there, trying to land a job. But the months of September and October were just filled, palpable, in the news with this anti-Latino vibe. You saw it on some of the TV ads of Pete Wilson running for governor, and of course the proponents of Proposition 187. And not only did it not make any sense to me, it frankly insulted me. It hurt me because I was coming home proud of my degree, not just what it meant for me as a young man starting a career, but as I mentioned earlier, as a symbol of accomplishment of my parents' sacrifices and struggles. To come home and hear from politicians that California is going downhill, and it's the fault of people like your parents, that shook me to my core. And even though up until that time I thought I never wanted anything to do with politics or politicians, I knew that I had no choice but to engage, to get involved in the community, to not just register to vote, but try to get other people registered to vote, that we had a voice if we exercised it. And if you looked at the demographics of Southern California at the time, it was already, had a significant Latino population, but I don't think our political voice was being heard in the political process because a lot of people like my parents weren't citizens, so they couldn't even register to vote. A lot of people, maybe like some of my friends and neighbors, might have been eligible but hadn't registered to vote because too many of us thought, why bother? What difference is it going to make? And certainly our voice was not being heard at the ballot box. So I learned quickly, both before the vote on 187 and especially after, when it passed, that we had to engage and change that trajectory, change the power of our voice in the political process. In 1994, when 187 was on the ballot, my parents had been here for not quite 30 years. They'd achieved legal residency, so they were here as legal permanent residents, but never had, the intention or let alone the urgency of becoming citizens. I think they were content having made it to the United States, had good jobs, they were raising a family, just kind of going about having a good life with this little dream of, no, algún día vamos a regresar. Someday we'll go back to Mexico. And I think 187 was a slap in the face, not just a wake-up call, It was coming to the realization, for me, that if I wanted to change, our political reality and our future, that so many of us more needed to engage. But I think for people like my parents, and there was millions across California who had been here for years and years and years without that sense of urgency to become citizens, they realized they had no choice. They needed to engage, begin the citizenship process, not just to be able to protect themselves and defend themselves in terms of their status here in the United States, but to be able to register to vote and to push back by participating in our democracy. So 1994 was the year 187 passed. Thankfully, it was ruled unconstitutional by the courts. In 1995, my father secretly began the naturalization process. And I remember he came home pretty proud when he shared the news with the family that he had begun the process. I would joke with him. I said, ahora le toca a usted. He would always ask us to do our homework and not forget to focus on our homework. And that was our turn to remind him, don't forget to study, don't forget to study. I get to share this story now with a lot of new citizens when I speak at naturalization ceremonies. I remember sitting on the couch with my dad going through the flashcards, right? Who was the first president of the United States, and why are there 13 stripes on the American flag, as he was getting ready for his interview and his test. A couple of years later, my mom started the process, and I remember how nervous she was when she was called in for her interview because she didn't want to mess up. She knew there was a lot at stake, so I know the effort and frankly the courage that it takes for someone from a foreign country now living in the United States to decide to become a citizen, because it's not an easy choice. It's not where you're from. It's not where you were born, maybe. It's a conscious choice you have to make and a process you have to go through. But it's one that I think is a reflection of that effort, of that dream, of that ambition, and of that vision of the future. My parents finally did that, and they've never missed an election ever since. Growing up, my parents always had us pretty involved in the community. We did a lot of community service in our neighborhood, whether it was painting over graffiti or planting trees, different projects, different organizations, volunteering at church or whatever it was. But I never equated community service with political involvement or activism. And after 187, I realized that no, if the goal is to try to improve my community, politics had to be a part of that. And so some of the same people who would call my parents, call our house saying, we've got to come to this meeting or we've got to go to this event, pretty soon we started knocking on doors, encouraging people to register to vote or to, don't forget to vote. It was pretty quickly for me from 1994 to get engaged in the 1996 election cycle with a candidate for office. Again, something I never thought I'd do, but I realized unless we start identifying people that we can believe in, that we can trust to be our representatives in different levels of government, then the politics was going to continue to be the same. And that is something that we weren't willing to accept. So looking back, I think I was organizing before I knew what organizing was. That math degree came in helpful because I knew if I registered and voted, I have one voice. But if I can register 10 or 100 or 1,000 people to vote and everybody voted, that's a much more powerful voice. There's strength in numbers. And that's what I was trying to achieve in my early involvement politically. Before I know it, I was learning how to manage campaigns. Managed the state assembly race in 1996 for Tony Cardenas, an underdog, but he was elected to the state assembly, and today I call my friend Congressman Cardenas. In 1997, I was the campaign manager for Gil Cedillo when he first ran for state assembly. In 1998, I was part of the team that helped elect Gray Davis as governor of California to take Pete Wilson's place as the governor of our state. So I think I quickly made the transition of not wanting anything to do with government or politics to realizing I had to engage and trying to be influential by determining who our representatives were, and by extension what the policy priorities would be for the state. So again, I remember the months and the weeks leading up to the November election and the intensity ramping up of what was on the ballot in 1994. And we got a call. I'm sure my mom took a call from one of the same community leaders that would invite us to all these meetings, all these events when they needed us to attend, and said there's going to be this big march from the east side to downtown, and we need to be there. So I have no doubt we drove to the church and got on a bus, and I do remember vividly getting off the bus at Salazar Park on the east side and being part of this epic march. You know, now it was historic. We look back at the images, but you know, getting off that day and seeing the mass of people, vast majority Latinos, there to march, there to speak up, there to stand up against the hate that we were feeling with this rhetoric around 187 and immigrants on the ballot in November of that year. It was a little tiring carrying my nephew on my shoulders the whole parade route, but I was there with my mom, I was there with my sister, and we walked from beginning all the way to the end of that march, somewhere between the LA Times building and City Hall, to be part of this demonstration. That look, we are here, we're demanding respect, we're against this measure, Prop 187, and for me, I knew intuitively that Southern California, and California as a whole, was relatively more diverse than probably the rest of the country. I knew that Latinos were a big population and growing, but it was this feeling of seeing that number of us out together, united, that gave me the palpable feeling in my stomach of our power. Just what kind of strength of message can be conveyed when we're physically together, whether we're standing, whether we're marching, but we're physically together behind one message. Again, I knew that regardless of what happened on Election Day, that I needed to get involved to change the politics. I needed to stay involved if we were going to stop being scapegoated as a community. You know, I remember vividly, we got off the bus at Salazar Park and saw a large number of people, but even that was some distance away from what was the starting point of the march. You know, we had a good, I don't know if it's half a mile or more even before we formally started participating in this parade. I mean, I think that was a reflection of how many people turned out. I don't know if that's what they were expecting or not, but it was a huge turnout of not just Latinos, but mostly Latinos turning out to stand up for ourselves, you know, against this rhetoric, against this negativity and hate of 187 and that election cycle, to demand our respect and to say, no, look, we are here. This is home for us too, regardless of what others are trying to portray about us on television through these political ads. This is who we are. People like my parents, we're here. We're working hard. We're trying to contribute to the society, working towards a better future, not just for my parents, but for the next generation. And that's what we want people to know. And we're not going to just sit idly by, let people attack us without standing up for ourselves. So during the course of that march, going from the east side all the way to downtown, and just being in awe of the sheer numbers of people that came out from throughout the region, it made a huge impact on me. Prior to that day, I knew intuitively and conceptually that we had a large Latino population in Southern California and throughout the state, for that matter, growing in numbers. But how were we still in this position of being scapegoated and targeted? It was because maybe we weren't as active politically in larger numbers like our population would lead you to believe. I looked around and saw people like my parents, maybe, who were immigrants, not yet citizens, and so of course they couldn't register to vote. I saw people maybe like a lot of my friends and neighbors who were eligible but maybe not registered, or maybe people who voted but maybe not as often. And so I realized when I saw these numbers that we have a tremendous political potential strength, but we need to do even more organizing and engaging to exercise it. Yes, I never looked back. After that march, we got through that election cycle. Proposition 187 passed. It was ultimately ruled unconstitutional, so it never went into effect. But I knew immediately that I wanted to be a part of changing California politics, changing the California political climate, changing California's trajectory by engaging in politics. Well, one of the things that's important to remember from the Proposition 187 experience was that it wasn't just Latinos that were standing up and speaking out. You saw the same happening with so many other immigrant communities throughout California, including and especially the Asian community. And we've seen the same relationships and political infrastructure that was built around the 187 campaign continue. You know, when I was on the city council of Los Angeles, not just representing my district, but to be considered a city leader, I needed to make sure I had those relationships with communities throughout the city, from South LA to Koreatown to the Croatian community in San Pedro and everywhere in between. And I think it's been that diversity, the embracing of that diversity in communities, but amongst elected officials and other community and political leaders that has made California and Los Angeles especially as resilient and as thriving as we see today. The policies that I pursue as Secretary of State, trying to register more eligible but unregistered Californians, it happens to disproportionately be young Latinos, but it's inclusive of the Asian community, the Black community, other communities of color and lower income communities. That's who we're enfranchising through these reforms that we're implementing in elections in California. So California is the most populous state in the nation. We're the most diverse state in the nation. It's when we engage and we embrace everybody that California is as strong as it can be. We see it because we test it every election cycle. We're going to see it and we're going to test it every census and so many other opportunities for our diverse voice to be heard. In my current role as Secretary of State, I feel in many ways like my life in public service has come full circle. You know, I started off as a young man trying to organize, trying to register more people to vote, whether it was in the community, going door to door, or at events, or even standing outside the convention center in Los Angeles where we were trying to encourage newly naturalized citizens to register and vote, to today. I serve as the Chief Elections Officer for the state of California. You know, if Proposition 187 was an attempt by some to exclude Latinos and others from the California dream, you know, I'm dedicating myself in this job to have as an inclusive democracy as possible. We do it in many forms. You know, you can't vote unless you're registered first. So there is, you know, online registration now for eligible citizens. There's automatic voter registration that's registering, you know, huge numbers of people each and every week, each and every month, each and every year. We changed our registration deadline laws. You can now register to vote and vote the same day to take any excuse off the table for not being able to be heard in the political process if you're a citizen. We're also bringing about changes to make it easier to vote if you're registered. You know, more vote by mail, the flexibility to vote anywhere in the county where you're registered, not just the polling place close to where you live. Voting over the course of 11 days, not just one day. We can maintain a secure election system, but we want to make sure it's as accessible and as inclusive as possible, because if we go back to what we all were taught in high school government class, our democracy works best when as many eligible people participate. That's what we're working towards, and that's what's created the California that we see today, very different than what we lived through in 1994. I think the story of California over the last 25 years, since 187, is one of mixed emotions for me. Because on the one hand, yes, 187 is long behind us. It never went into effect. Those days are behind us. But that's not true. In recent years, we've seen what's happening at the national political level. You know, the rhetoric, one side of the aisle, about immigrants and immigration, Latinos specifically, it's all too reminiscent of the negativity that we felt, the hate that we felt back in 1994. It's good news because California has come a long way, so we're shielded from some of that that the rest of the country is going through. If anything, I think the California story is a story of hope for the rest of the nation. You know, look at California today. We've gone from, you know, not as sufficient representation and the policies that result from that to an environment where not just one, not just two, not just three, 4 of our statewide officials are Latinos, right? Legislative leaders, committee chairs, mayors up and down the state, the numbers in our congressional delegation. The policy and political environment in California is very different today because we didn't run and hide, because we didn't just put our head down and try to mind our own business. We responded to 187 through engagement. And I think that's the recipe, that's the formula that we want to share with the rest of the country for our brothers and sisters in all the other states that are now fighting the fights that we fought 25 years ago. This is how we turn it around. This is how we can change the trajectory of communities throughout the country and our nation as a whole. It's through engagement. So, again, the 187 story is one of mixed emotions. Another example is that even though California has come a long way, 187 sort of continues to live in different forms. You saw SB 1070 in Arizona. You saw SB 4 in Texas. Even now a debate at the national level about public charge and other anti-immigrant actions by the Trump administration, family separations at the border, children being incarcerated, the DACA debate, the pardoning of Joe Arpaio. I mean, it's one thing after another at the federal level. I think what the Republican Party and Trump especially has done is try to hold on to the strategy of a 187 for short-term relevancy, but it's not going to prevent the inevitable change that's going to happen as our population continues to grow across the country. We continue to diversify, and we continue to engage in the political process. Democracy will ultimately win. The will of the people, the voice of the people will be heard, and we can either wait for it to happen or we can accelerate it through engagement. Life is just interesting and cruel at times. Just when we think that we've advanced, if not as a nation, just at least as a society, beyond certain things, that images like the crossing of the Pettus Bridge during the Civil Rights Movement, and the water hoses and the attack dogs that I remember seeing from the Civil Rights Movement days. Just when you thought that was behind us, years later, measures like Proposition 187 kind of reappear. Same hate, same scapegoating, same kind of political, not just suppression, but oppression. And in California, we think that we've come a long way since then, only to be dealt with this reality of, under the current national political climate and under this administration, that a lot of those sentiments and measures and tactics are back, whether it's in the form of political strategies and policies, or whether it's in the form of violence. Our heart goes out to our brothers and sisters in El Paso and elsewhere where there has been clearly hate-driven violence, specifically targeted our community. As I travel across the country, I remind people that 1 week before the shooting in El Paso, there was a shooting in Gilroy, California, at a garlic festival of all places. So yes, unfortunately, that discrimination, that bigotry, that hate, that fuels violence still exists in our society, as much progress as we've made. So the work is not done to try to make more progress, overcome that, try to teach not just tolerance, but acceptance and the value of diversity so that everybody can celebrate and truly embrace that. But we're going to have to keep at it. Despite these harsh incidents and rhetoric, maybe especially because of the intensity of the harsh rhetoric and violent incidents, I'm so proud of Dreamers and other young activists today for them to put themselves out there the way they do, risking as much as they do. I thought we were bold and brave and courageous responding to 187, before and after its passage. The next generation, the challenges are even harsher, but young people are stepping up with even more courage, more bravery. If what we've done over the last 20, 25 years has motivated them, given them the confidence to do so just a little bit, then I think maybe we have done our part in encouraging the next generation of activists and leaders. And I know that it's only a matter of time before we overcome the attacks and the threats that we're facing today. Where California is today and how people view California today is a direct result of how our community has responded to Proposition 187. one example. In 1994, there were about 1.4 million Latinos registered to vote in the state of California. Today, well over 5 million. That's a huge increase, a huge difference, and you see it, not just in terms of our representation in the congressional delegation, in the legislature, in county and city governments up and down the state, but more importantly, by the policies that are prioritized and passed. Because we are now more involved at all levels of politics and government in the state, we have policies like sanctuary state. Just consider that for a minute. Less than 25 years after the passage of Proposition 187, California became a sanctuary state. That is not a coincidence. It's a direct result of our decision to engage as a community. We have in California a healthcare system that's inclusive of children regardless of immigration status. California is where the original DREAM Act started. Former Assemblymember Marco Fireball had this audacious idea that if young people who were brought here from another country without documents, through no fault of their own, but they grew up here, graduated from high school here, and wanted to go to college, that they should be able to. And eventually, if they couldn't afford college, that they should be eligible for financial aid, regardless of documentary status. So California's been a pioneer on a lot of policies that embrace and include citizen and non-citizen alike. It's a debate that's now being waged at the national level, but the reason there's such a strong foundation and strong precedent for it in California is because of how our community responded to Proposition 187. I think if Proposition 187 would have remained in effect, we'd have a very different California today. People say, well, California is just the way it is because of how diverse of a state it is. That's not necessarily true. You can look at maybe the state of Texas, another state that's pretty diverse, also big, very different political environment and very different, it's not quite as welcoming to communities of color in the political process as a state like California. I think when Proposition 187 was a wake-up call, it called a lot of people to engage, but when it was deemed unconstitutional, it allowed us to not only continue to engage, but the forces and the people and the organizations that came together to campaign against 187, the great news is that it stayed in place, and people continued to use that motivation against 187 to push back against other measures in 1996 and 1998 and beyond, but also to help elect a different type of representative. And we see the changes in not just the congressional delegation to this day, in the state legislature to this day, but on school boards and county supervisors and mayor's offices throughout the state because of how our community responded to Proposition 187. That's why California is the resistance. I think for me, one of the big lessons of 187 was, not just our community coming together to demand respect, but to be viewed as equals, as equal Californians, as equal Americans, and an equal opportunity to pursue the American dream. Obviously, part of that respect and equality isn't just being able to go about to our daily lives, trying to raise families and participate in the economy, but also to serve as leaders across the board in the private sector, in academia, and in public service. So I've had the opportunity to translate my early organizing activism days into elected office. I've served on the Los Angeles City Council, in the California legislature as a state senator, and now as California Secretary of State. And I think it's an equal test back to us once we're able to achieve these leadership opportunities, these positions of responsibility, when we serve, demonstrate that we can serve and represent everybody. When we're asking that same respect of representatives, we have to be able to receive that same question as representatives. And whether it's my days on city council as a member, as a president of the council, entertaining public safety ideas and recreation and park opportunities and library funding, how we do that equitably throughout the city. When I was in the legislature working on education issues, technology issues, serving as chair of the Senate Energy Committee at a critical time battling climate change, how do we, as a proud Latino, but serve in a way that is of the benefit of all Californians? And certainly in my role as Secretary of State, a lot of responsibilities from business filings and archives. The most important, though, is elections. Proud to be a Latino, but as Secretary of State, I want to make sure that our elections are secure and as accessible to all eligible citizens as possible. And if I can do the job and do it well, then we're once again demonstrating to everybody that Latinos have a rightful place in leadership and in the United States of America.